He ignored every beautiful woman in the kingdom and grabbed the hand of a servant girl nobody had ever noticed. The court screamed, "What is he doing?" But when shadows started rising from her feet and a council lord went pale with terror, they realized she wasn't nobody. She was the one they thought they'd killed 19 years ago. And she remembered everything. If you believe everyone deserves a chance at destiny, no matter their rank, hit subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles. Only those who think power and bloodlines are all that matter won't.
In the kingdom of Obsidian Vale, where night reigned eternal and power was measured in bloodlines, King Salvian Darkborn was the sovereign every clan feared and worshipped. His hair was moonlit silk, his eyes carved ice, his presence alone bent armies to their knees. When he decreed the bloodbound selection, a sacred choosing held once every century, thousands of noble vampire women descended upon Obsidian Vale. They were warrior maidens with scars like medals, sorceresses with hypnotic gazes, and alpha-blooded duchesses dripping in ancient jewels. Every single one of them burned for his attention, for the honor of becoming his eternal consort. But the mate bond cares nothing for perfection or power. It searches for a missing piece, an echo carved into destiny itself. And it found its echo not in the candlelit ballroom, but behind a marble pillar, in the trembling hands of a silent Omega girl the kingdom had trained itself not to see. The heart of Obsidian Vale, the palace of eternal dusk, was a symphony of desperation. The air, usually cold with stone and ancient magic, now choked on competing perfumes and enchantments. From the polished obsidian floors of the grand hall to the highest turrets, the palace teemed with vampire nobility of every bloodline and ambition. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over silk gowns that shimmered like liquid starlight. Noblewomen whispered behind jeweled fans, their eyes sharp with calculation. They were duchesses, clan leaders, enchantresses, each one convinced destiny would choose them. At the center of it all stood King Salvian Darkborn. His white ceremonial coat was embroidered with silver thread that caught the candlelight, his posture regal and untouchable. Women reached toward him with delicate hands, their expressions a mixture of longing and desperation. He acknowledged none of them. His electric blue eyes swept the hall with cold precision, searching for something he couldn't name. Deep below the splendor, in the forgotten corridors of the palace archives, the world was different. Here the air was thick with dust and the metallic scent of ancient ink. Silence reigned, broken only by the scratch of quills and the soft shuffle of bare feet on stone. And through this shadowed kingdom moved Calista. She was 19, though she looked younger. Dark hair fell like a curtain over pale features, and her storm-gray eyes were always downcast. An Omega. An orphan. A girl with no family name worth speaking. But her most defining trait was her silence. Calista never spoke. Not a word. She drifted through the archives like smoke, shelving scrolls and copying manuscripts with hands that trembled slightly in the cold. The other servants had stopped trying to include her years ago. She was simply part of the furniture, useful, forgettable, invisible. But Calista harbored secrets even she didn't fully understand. Sometimes the shadows curled toward her feet like affectionate creatures. Sometimes she heard whispers in the walls, old magic humming beneath the stone. And sometimes, when she touched certain ancient texts, her fingertips tingled with something that felt like recognition. She never told anyone. To be noticed was dangerous. To be different was deadly. Calista. Mira burst into the archive room, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Mira was another Omega, a kitchen servant with nervous energy and a kind heart. She was Callista's only friend in the palace. Did you hear? Lady Seraphine Valtier arrived this morning in a carriage made of black crystal. They say she can command storms and her bloodline goes back 7 centuries. Everyone's saying she's the one the king will choose. Calista paused in her work, a scroll clutched in her small hands. She offered Mira a slight questioning glance, her way of asking for more details. The selection ceremony is tonight, Mira continued breathlessly. Thousands of women, all competing. Can you imagine? What would it be like to be chosen? To be queen? She sighed dreamily, then caught herself. Not that people like us would ever. I mean, we're just Calista reached out and gently touched the faint bruise on Myra's wrist, a punishment from a visiting lord who'd been displeased with his wine service. The message was clear: this world is not for us. To be seen is to be hurt. Myra's smile faded. I know. Just a foolish dream. Hours later, as evening descended and the palace thrummed with anticipation, Calista was ordered to deliver scrolls to the royal secretary's office, a route that passed dangerously close to the grand hall. She moved through the corridors with her usual silence, arms laden with parchment. But curiosity, that forbidden thing, made her pause behind a massive marble pillar at the hall's edge. The scene before her was breathtaking. Hundreds of vampire women stood in glittering formation beneath chandeliers that blazed like captured stars. They were achingly beautiful, each one more stunning than the last. And at the center, untouchable as carved marble, stood King Salvian. Women reached toward him with desperate longing. Some called his name. Others wept. All of them wanted him. He looked through them as though they were made of glass. Calista should have left. She was trespassing simply by witnessing this. But something held her frozen, a strange pull she couldn't name. She watched as Salvian's jaw tightened, as his powerful hands clenched at his sides. He looked lost. Alone in a room full of thousands. King Salvian's senses were being flayed alive. Every perfume was a blade. Every heartbeat a hammer. Every desperate thought projected at him crashed against his mind like waves against stone. His vampire instincts, ancient, primal, infallible, should have recognized his mate by now. The bond should have struck like lightning. But there was nothing. Just noise. Just emptiness. He was centuries old, and he had never felt more tired. Perhaps I'm not meant to have a mate, he thought bitterly. Perhaps I'm meant to rule alone until... Then it hit him. A scent. Faint as a whisper. Not perfume or blood or magic. It was silence, delicate as winter air, soft as untouched snow, and utterly impossible to ignore. His head snapped toward the shadows at the hall's edge. His entire body went rigid. There. Behind the marble pillar. Half hidden in darkness. A girl. Small, trembling, clutching scrolls against her chest like a shield. Her gray eyes went wide with terror as his gaze locked onto hers. And Salvian's world shattered. The bond roared to life with such force it drove the breath from his lungs. Every instinct he possessed screamed one word: mine. Calista couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The white vampire king was staring directly at her, through hundreds of noblewomen, through the crowd, through everything, at her. His electric blue eyes burned into hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. The shadows at her feet began to writhe. If you can't stand people who judge others by their rank and treat omegas like they're worthless, comment "Everyone deserves respect" and subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles. Let me know what time you're watching this, because those who believe in real destiny are watching right now. Salvian took a step forward. Then another. The crowd began to notice. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Salvian took a step forward. Then another. The crowd began to notice. Whispers erupted like wildfire. The royal herald's voice rang out, trembling with ceremony. Let the bloodbound selection commence. May destiny guide our king to his eternal consort. The massive chandeliers blazed brighter, casting the grand hall in golden radiance. Noblewomen stepped forward in perfect formation, warrior clans with battle-scarred grace, royal daughters draped in ancestral jewels, enchantresses whose eyes glowed with ancient power. Each one stood taller, prouder, more breathtaking than the last. They were the elite of vampire society, handpicked from across the continent. Any one of them would make a legendary queen. But Salvian wasn't looking at them. His heartbeat, silent for centuries, thundered in his chest. The scent that had captured him grew stronger with each step he took. Quiet. Snow. Dusk. And beneath it all, something older. something that called to the deepest part of his bloodline. His eyes darkened from electric blue to midnight black as primal instinct seized control. Every fiber of his being pointed toward the shadows. Toward her. The hall fell silent as the king began to move. Lady Seraphine Valtier stepped forward first, her storm gray gown shimmering like thunderclouds. She was magnificent, 7 centuries of pure bloodline radiating from her like heat. She extended her hand with practiced grace, her smile confident. "Your Majesty." Salvian walked past her without a glance. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Duchess Morgana Ashfeld tried next, her crimson lips parting in shock as the king strode past her as though she were invisible. Then Lady Yvain, whose family had ruled the Eastern Territories for generations. Then the Vex twins, legendary for their synchronized combat magic. One by one, the most powerful women in the kingdom watched in disbelief as their sovereign ignored them completely. Desperate hands reached out. Some called his name. Others stepped directly into his path. Salvian moved through them like cold lightning, untouchable, unstoppable, his focus locked on the marble pillar at the hall's edge. The crowd parted before him, confusion turning to shock, shock twisting into outrage. "What is he doing?" someone whispered. "He's walking away from the selection. This is madness." Behind the pillar, Callista's world was collapsing. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The most powerful vampire alive was walking toward her, and she had nowhere to run. The scrolls tumbled from her arms, scattering across the floor. She pressed herself against the cold stone, making herself as small as possible, praying the shadows would swallow her whole. They didn't. Salvian rounded the pillar and stopped. Up close, he was devastating. Moonlit hair. Eyes like winter midnight. Power radiating from him in waves that made the air itself tremble. He towered over her, yet his expression held something she'd never seen directed at her before, reverence. "You," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. "It's you." Calista shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her face. This was wrong. This was impossible. She was nothing, an Omega servant who wasn't supposed to exist in his world. She tried to back away but the pillar blocked her escape. Salvian reached out slowly, carefully, as though approaching something precious and wild. His hand closed gently around her wrist. The touch sent shockwaves through them both, the mate bond blazing to life with such intensity that shadows exploded outward from Callista's feet, and frost crept across the floor beneath Salvian's boots. The king's voice rang out across the silent hall, clear and absolute, "Mine." The hall erupted into chaos. An Omega? He's chosen a servant? This is an abomination. Nobles shouted over each other. Some warrior clans reached for weapons. The enchantress's eyes blazed with fury. Lady Seraphine's face contorted with rage and humiliation. The carefully orchestrated ceremony dissolved into pandemonium. Salvian's aura exploded outward, a crushing wave of royal dominance that drove everyone to their knees. The chandeliers swayed. Goblets shattered. Even the strongest alphas gasped under the weight of his power. "Silence," he commanded, and the word itself felt like law. In the sudden quiet, one man remained standing. Lord Dorian Vexmore stepped forward from the crowd, his silver hair immaculate, his expression carved from stone. He was distinguished, dangerous, head of the High Council and the second most powerful vampire in the kingdom. His daughter Lucinda stood behind him, her beautiful face twisted with hatred as she stared at Calista. "Your Majesty," Dorian's voice was silk over steel. "Surely you cannot mean to break centuries of tradition. The bloodbound selection has always chosen from noble bloodlines. This girl is..." "My mate," Salvian cut him off, his tone lethal. "Are you questioning destiny itself, Lord Vexmore?" Dorian's jaw tightened, but he bowed with perfect precision. "Of course not, Your Majesty. I merely express concern for the kingdom's stability. An Omega Queen will be crowned beside me, and any who object will answer to me personally." Salvian's eyes swept the hall, daring anyone to challenge him. No one moved. Cashin, his second-in-command, appeared instantly, dark-haired and efficient. Your Majesty. Escort Lady Calista to the royal wing. Post guards at her door. No one enters without my direct permission. Salvian's hand lingered on Callista's wrist before releasing her. His eyes met hers one final time, and she saw something fierce burning there: possession, protection, and promise. You're safe now. As guards surrounded her and began guiding her away, Calista looked back once. Salvian stood like a white flame amidst the wreckage of tradition, his gaze tracking her until she disappeared from view. The crowd began to disperse, whispering furiously. But Dorian Vexmore remained motionless, his expression unreadable as he watched the Omega girl vanish into the palace corridors. His daughter Lucinda appeared at his side, trembling with rage. Father, you can't let this stand. Dorian's hand came down on her shoulder, silencing her. His eyes glittered with cold calculation as he stared at the empty doorway. Don't worry, my dear, he whispered, his voice barely audible. She will not last the night. If you believe no one should be judged by their rank or birth, comment Destiny doesn't bow to bloodlines and smash that subscribe button. Those who think power and titles are all that matter won't. What happens when Dorian makes his move? Keep watching. The royal wing was a world Calista had only glimpsed while delivering messages, a realm of silk tapestries, polished marble, and luxury so profound it felt suffocating. The guards deposited her in a guest chamber 3 times the size of the servants' quarters she'd shared with a dozen others. Velvet curtains framed floor-to-ceiling windows. A 4-poster bed draped in silver fabric dominated the room. Candles floated in crystalline holders, casting warm light across surfaces that gleamed like mirrors. Calista stood frozen in the center of it all, trembling. This was wrong. This was a mistake. Any moment now, someone would realize the error and drag her back to the archives, or worse, to the dungeons for daring to deceive a king. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to become smaller, invisible, the way she'd learned to survive. But the bond hummed beneath her skin like a living thing, refusing to let her disappear. A soft knock made her flinch. The door opened, and Salvian entered. He'd removed the ceremonial coat, now dressed in simple black attire that somehow made him look even more dangerous. His moonlit hair was slightly disheveled, as though he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. Those winter blue eyes found her instantly, and something in his expression softened. You're afraid, he said quietly, closing the door behind him. Callista's instinct was to bow, to kneel, to make herself subservient, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. She simply stood there, shaking, unable to even nod. Salvian approached slowly, the way one might approach a wounded animal. I won't hurt you. I could never. He stopped a few feet away, maintaining careful distance. What's your name? For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Her voice had been silent for so long that the words felt like shards of glass in her throat. But something about his presence, calm, patient, genuinely curious, made her try. Calista, she whispered, the sound barely audible. The effect on Salvian was immediate. His eyes darkened to midnight, his hands clenched at his sides, and he drew in a sharp breath as though her voice had struck him physically. Calista, he repeated, tasting her name like sacred wine. You have no idea what you've done to me. The candles around the room suddenly flickered, all of them, simultaneously, their flames bending toward Calista as though drawn by invisible threads. The shadows at her feet began to move, curling upward like smoke, wrapping protectively around her ankles. She gasped and stepped back, terrified. Salvian's eyes widened. You feel it too. The magic. I'm not, Callista's voice broke. I'm just an Omega. I'm nobody. You're my mate, Salvian said fiercely. You're everything. Before she could respond, hurried footsteps echoed in the corridor. Cashin burst through the door, his expression grim. Your Majesty, we have a situation. Lord Vexmore is addressing the council. Cassion's eyes flicked to Calista, hesitating. Say it, Salvian commanded. He's claiming the girl used forbidden magic to bewitch you. He's calling for an investigation into her bloodline. Some of the noble houses are demanding she be removed from the palace for the kingdom's safety. Salvian's fury was a cold, terrible thing. Frost spread across the floor beneath his feet, creeping up the walls. Dorian moves quickly. There's more, Cassion continued carefully. Rumors are spreading through the court. They're saying she's cursed. That her presence will bring ruin to Obsidian Vale. Some are even whispering about prophecies. Old ones. Callista's breath caught. Prophecies? What prophecies? She knew nothing of her past, only that she'd been found as a child in the palace archives with no memory of how she'd arrived. Double the guards at her door, Salvian ordered. No one enters without my express permission. And Cassion, investigate Dorian. Everything. His finances, his alliances, his movements tonight. He's planning something. Already done, Your Majesty. Cassion bowed and departed, leaving them alone once more. Salvian turned back to Calista, his expression torn between rage at the court and tenderness toward her. I won't let them hurt you. I swear it on my bloodline. Hours later, deep into the night, Calista lay awake in the massive bed, staring at the canopy above. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow seemed to hold assassins. She'd never felt more exposed in her life. Then she heard it, the soft scrape of metal against stone. The window. Someone was opening the window. A figure in dark clothing slipped through, blade glinting in the moonlight. A royal guard, his face covered, moving with lethal silence toward the bed. Callista's scream died in her throat, her voice failing her as it always did in moments of terror. The assassin raised his blade. The door exploded inward. Salvian moved with inhuman speed, crossing the room in a blur. He caught the assassin's wrist mid-strike, and the crack of bones breaking echoed through the chamber. The guard screamed. Salvian's other hand closed around his throat, lifting him off the ground. Who sent you? Salvian's voice was death itself. The guard gurgled, defiant even as life left his eyes. The Omega will die, one way or another. Salvian's hand tightened, and the assassin went limp. He dropped the body without ceremony and turned to Calista, who had pressed herself against the headboard, eyes wide with shock. Cassion. Salvian's roar brought guards flooding into the room. Lockdown. No. No one enters or leaves the royal wing without my knowledge. Search every room, every corridor. Find out who else is involved. As guards dragged the body away and Cassion barked orders, Salvian approached Calista slowly. You're safe. I promise you're safe. That night, he didn't leave. He pulled a chair to her door and sat vigil, refusing to move despite her protests. Calista lay in bed, feeling the strangest mixture of terror and security. The most powerful vampire alive was guarding her door. Her. The invisible Omega. Sleep came eventually, but with it came nightmares. Fire. Screaming. Shadows twisting into monstrous shapes. A woman's voice calling her name, Calista, run. Blood on white stone. Soldiers with cold eyes. And above it all, a man's face commanding the slaughter, a face she recognized now as younger, but unmistakable, Dorian Vexmore. Calista woke with a silent scream trapped in her throat, thrashing against the sheets, unable to breathe. The door crashed open. Salvian was there instantly, kneeling beside the bed, his hands hovering near her shoulders but not quite touching. Calista. Calista, look at me. You're safe. You're here. She looked up at him through tears, and something broke inside her. For the first time in years, she reached out, and he caught her hand like it was made of glass. I saw him, she whispered, her voice raw. In my dreams. Dorian. He was there when something terrible happened. When I was a child. Salvian's expression turned to stone. Tell me everything. If you believe Dorian deserves to be exposed for his crimes, comment Justice for Calista and subscribe. Only those who side with corruption and murder won't. The truth is coming, and it's darker than anyone imagined. Tell me everything. Callista's hands trembled in Salvian's grip as fragmented images flickered through her mind, fire, screaming, a woman's face she couldn't quite remember. I don't know what it means. I was so young. I thought they were just nightmares, but, her voice broke. His face was there. Dorian. He was younger, but it was him. He was giving orders. Salvian's jaw tightened. Orders to do what? To kill them. Everyone. I remember hiding, and someone, a woman, she pushed me into darkness. Told me to stay silent. To never be seen. Tears streamed down Callista's face. I don't even know who she was. Your mother, Salvian said softly. She was protecting you. He stood abruptly, still holding her hand. At dawn, we searched the archives. If Dorian erased your past, there has to be a reason, and I intend to find it. Morning came too quickly. Salvian had his scholars pull every record mentioning orphans found in the palace 19 years ago. They found nothing. No birth records. No family name. No arrival documentation. It was as though Calista had simply materialized in the archives one day, and no one had questioned it. This level of erasure requires council approval, Cashin reported grimly. Someone with significant power wanted her history buried. Salvian's eyes blazed. Dorian. If he went to such lengths to hide her identity, Cashin continued carefully, then discovering it might be dangerous for her. Or it might be the only thing that keeps her alive. Salvian turned to Calista, who stood quietly near the window, looking small in borrowed noble attire. Do you remember anything else? Any names? Symbols? Words your mother said? Calista shook her head helplessly. Just, shadows. She spoke to shadows like they were alive. Something flickered in Salvian's expression, recognition, perhaps, or fear. We need the restricted archives. The sealed section. Later that afternoon, while Salvian met with his war council about border tensions, Calista slipped away. She'd spent years in the archives, she knew passages the guards didn't. Something pulled her back to that familiar world of dust and parchment, a whisper in her blood she couldn't ignore. The shadows welcomed her like old friends, curling around her feet as she navigated the forgotten corridors. They seemed almost excited, guiding her deeper than she'd ever ventured. To a section sealed behind iron gates that should have been locked. They weren't. Inside, ancient texts crumbled on shelves. Callista's hands moved of their own accord, pulling a leather-bound tome that felt warm to the touch. Pages fell open, and her breath caught. A torn fragment remained, barely legible. The umbral line, last of the Shadowbound, were executed by royal decree. Their power to command darkness itself was deemed too dangerous. All records are to be destroyed. All descendants eliminated. By order of Council Lord Dorian Vexmore. The book fell from her hands. Umbral line. Shadowbound. Her family. So you found it. Calista spun. Dorian Vexmore stood in the doorway, flanked by 4 guards in unmarked armor. His smile was cold, calculating. I knew your instincts would lead you here eventually. Just like your mother. Stay back, Callista's voice was barely a whisper. Did you really think the White King would protect you once he knew what you are? Dorian stepped closer, and the guards fanned out, blocking her escape. Your bloodline nearly destroyed this kingdom once. I won't let it happen again. Salvian will kill you. Salvian will thank me for removing the curse from his bloodline. Dorian nodded to his men. Take her. They moved with brutal efficiency. A cloth soaked in something chemical covered her mouth. The world tilted, and darkness swallowed her whole. When Calista woke, she was chained to a stone altar in a chamber that reeked of old blood and forbidden magic. Runes glowed on the walls, ancient, wrong, pulsing with malevolent energy. Dorian stood over her, his hands stained with ritual markings. "I should have done this 19 years ago," he said conversationally. "But you were so small, so quiet. I thought you'd died in the purge with the others." Imagine my surprise when the king's bond led him straight to the one bloodline I'd worked so hard to eliminate. "Please," Calista struggled against the chains, but they burned her skin. "Your mother was powerful. She commanded shadows that devoured entire armies. But you?" Dorian's hand pressed against her forehead, and pain exploded through her skull. "Let's see what you inherited." The blood magic tore into her mind like claws, ripping through barriers she didn't know existed. Memories flooded back in agonizing waves. A grand estate. Shadow wolves with silver eyes bowing before a woman in black, her mother, queen of the umbral line. Playing in gardens where darkness moved like living silk. Soldiers breaking down doors. Her father fighting, falling, blood spreading across marble. Her mother's voice, "Run, Calista. Let the shadows hide you. Never speak, never be seen, never let them know what you are." Dorian's younger face, cold with determination, "Burn it all. Leave nothing. The Shadowbound end tonight." Darkness swallowing her, carrying her through stone and earth, depositing her in dusty archives where she curled up small and silent, forgetting everything except the command to hide. "There it is," Dorian breathed. "The truth you buried so deep even you couldn't find it. You're the last umbral. The last Shadowbound. And now." Power exploded from Calista in a shockwave that shattered the chains. Shadows erupted from every corner of the chamber, not flickering, not gentle, but roaring like a hurricane of living darkness. They had teeth. They had rage. They remembered everything. Dorian stumbled back, his eyes wide with genuine fear. "No, impossible, you're just an Omega. I am umbral." Callista's voice rang out like thunder, no longer small, no longer silent. The shadows obeyed her fury, lunging at Dorian's guards. Two vanished into darkness, their screams cut short. The others fled. Dorian barely made it to the door, slamming it shut as shadows clawed at the wood. "This isn't over, girl. The council will never accept you. You're a monster." His voice faded as he ran. Calista collapsed, the power draining from her as quickly as it had come. The shadows retreated, but they remained close, watchful, protective, waiting for her command. She could feel them now. Feel the centuries of magic in her blood. Feel the truth of what she was. The door burst open again. Salvian stood there, his eyes wild, frost spreading from his feet. "Calista." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, shadows still writhing around her hands. "I remember everything. Dorian killed my family. He destroyed my bloodline because he feared what we could become." Salvian crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. The bond flared between them, not just connection, but recognition. Power meeting power. King meeting queen. "You're not his victim anymore," he said fiercely. "You're Shadowbound. You're umbral. You're mine. And together, we're going to make him pay." He felt it then, the bond strengthening, solidifying into something unbreakable. She wasn't his weakness. She was his equal. His match. His destiny. "Cash in." Salvian's command echoed through the chamber. "Summon the full council. Emergency session. Now." He looked down at Calista, his expression fierce with pride. "It's time Obsidian Vale learned the truth. If you can't stand cowards like Dorian who murder innocent families and cover up their crimes, comment Dorian must fall and subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles. Only those who support corruption and genocide won't. Let's see who stands for justice. The council hall was a cathedral of power, vaulted ceilings carved with centuries of vampire history, obsidian pillars that gleamed like frozen night, and a circular table where the kingdom's most influential lords gathered to shape destiny. Tonight, every seat was filled. Word had spread of the emergency session, and tension crackled in the air like lightning waiting to strike. Salvian entered with Calista at his side, not behind him like a servant, but beside him like an equal. She wore simple gray attire, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, but the shadows that clung to her feet marked her as something far more than an Omega. Whispers erupted immediately. The Omega. She walks beside him like a queen. What is that darkness around her? Dorian Vexmore sat at the head of the council table, his expression carved from ice. His daughter Lucinda stood behind him, her eyes burning with hatred. Around them, the most powerful vampire lords in Obsidian Vale watched with calculating interest: Lord Ashfeld, Duchess Morgana, the Vex twins, and a dozen others whose bloodlines stretched back millennia. "Your Majesty," Dorian's voice carried across the chamber with practiced authority. "You summon us at this unprecedented hour and bring her into these sacred halls. The council demands explanation." Salvian's hand remained at Callista's back, protective, possessive. "The explanation is simple. You stand accused of genocide, Lord Vexmore. Of murdering an entire bloodline and covering your crime for nearly 2 decades. The council erupted. Lords shouted over each other. Duchess Morgana's hand went to her throat. The Vex twins exchanged shocked glances. Preposterous. Dorian rose, his face flushed with righteous indignation. "Your Majesty, this girl has clearly bewitched you. She practices forbidden magic, dark arts that threaten the very foundation of our kingdom. Look at her. Those shadows are proof of corruption. Those shadows," Salvian's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, "are her birthright. She is Calista of the Umbral line. Last daughter of the Shadowbound. The bloodline you exterminated." Silence fell like a guillotine. "Impossible," Lord Ashfeld breathed. "The Umbral line was destroyed by plague. By murder," Callista's soft voice somehow carried to every corner of the hall. Dorian ordered it. I remember everything now." Dorian's laugh was sharp, dismissive. "The delusions of a traumatized Omega. Your Majesty, I invoke ancient law, Section 7 of the Blood Accords, which clearly states that no Omega may hold the title of queen. It is forbidden. Their bloodline is too weak, their wolf too submissive. This girl, regardless of her fabricated heritage, cannot and will not sit beside you on the throne." Several council members nodded. The law was ancient, carved in stone during the first vampire kingdom. Omegas had never ruled. "Then change the law," Salvian said flatly. "The council does not answer to lovesick kings." Dorian's composure cracked. "You would overturn centuries of tradition for a girl you've known mere days? She has poisoned your mind. I demand you renounce her, for the good of Obsidian Vale." "I will do no such thing." "Then you leave me no choice." Dorian's hand moved with inhuman speed, producing a blade from within his robes, sun-forged steel, glowing with deadly light. Ancient magic that could kill even an immortal king. He lunged. Time fractured. Salvian tried to move, but Dorian was faster than he should be, enhanced by forbidden magic. The blade struck true, plunging into Salvian's chest just below his heart. The king staggered, shock written across his face. His legendary healing should have activated instantly. It didn't. Salvian collapsed to his knees, blood spreading across his white attire. The sun-forged steel was specifically designed to prevent vampire regeneration, a weapon that shouldn't exist, that had been banned for 3 centuries. Dorian stepped back, breathing hard, his eyes wild. He was compromised. The king was compromised, and I saved us all. Stop. Callista's voice was no longer soft. It was command incarnate, power that had slept for 19 years finally awakening fully. Shadows exploded from her body in a tidal wave, freezing every person in the chamber mid-motion. Dorian stood paralyzed, his mouth open in shock. The council lords were statues. Even the guards at the doors couldn't move. Only Calista moved freely. She dropped to her knees beside Salvian, whose eyes were already glazing. No. No, you don't get to leave me. Not now. Not after everything. Her hands pressed against his wound, and her blood, crimson mixed with swirling shadow, dripped onto his skin. Ancient instinct took over. The umbral line hadn't just commanded darkness. They had been healers of the forbidden, their shadow magic capable of mending what light could not touch. Callista's power poured into Salvian's wound, darkness merging with his bloodline, weaving through his veins like liquid night. The sun-forged blade's poison fought back, but Shadow was older. Shadow was patient. Shadow remembered how to unmake curses. Salvian gasped as life flooded back into his body. His eyes cleared, focusing on Callista's tear-stained face above him. The wound began to close, darkness and blood magic intertwining in a dance unseen for centuries. When he could finally speak, his voice was raw with wonder. How? Umbral queens don't just command shadows, Calista whispered. We heal what darkness has broken. She helped him stand, and together they faced the frozen council. Callista's voice rang out clear and terrible. 19 years ago, Dorian Vexmore ordered the execution of my family. Not because we were dangerous. Because he feared us. Because an umbral queen would have seen through his corruption, his schemes, his hunger for power. She gestured, and shadows flickered across the walls, projecting her recovered memories for all to see, Dorian giving orders, soldiers burning her home, her mother fighting to save her daughter while Dorian watched with cold satisfaction. He murdered children, Callista's voice broke. Burned innocents. Destroyed an entire bloodline to protect his political ambitions. And when fate chose me as your king's mate, he tried to finish what he started. The shadows released the council. Several lords stumbled back, horror written on their faces. Duchess Morgana's hand covered her mouth. Lord Ashfeld's eyes burned with fury. She lies. Dorian screamed, but his voice shook. Shadowbound magic creates illusions. Memories don't lie. Salvian's voice was death itself as he stood fully healed, frost spreading across the floor beneath him. And neither does attempted regicide. Dorian looked around wildly at the council, seeking support. He found only disgust and rage. His daughter Lucinda backed away from him, shaking her head in denial. Father, what have you done? What I had to. Dorian's composure shattered completely. The umbral line would have destroyed everything we built. Their power was unnatural, wrong. Your fear was unnatural. Calista stepped forward, and shadows rose around her like loyal wolves. Your jealousy. Your greed. And now you'll answer for every life you stole. The shadows surged forward, no longer gentle, no longer controlled. They remembered. They had waited 19 years. And they were hungry for justice. The shadows surged forward like a tsunami of living darkness, remembering every child burned, every life stolen, every scream silenced. They moved with terrible purpose toward Dorian Vexmore, who stumbled backward, his face twisted with terror. No, wait, I was protecting the kingdom. His words dissolved into a shriek as he made one final, desperate lunge, not at the shadows, but at Calista herself. If he was going down, he'd take the umbral abomination with him. He never reached her. The shadows rose between them like a wall of night, then crashed over Dorian in a wave that swallowed his scream. The council watched in horrified awe as darkness wrapped around him, not killing, something far more fitting. The shadows pulled him down, not into death, but into eternal oblivion. A place of absolute silence where he would exist forever, aware but unable to speak, unable to move, unable to do anything but remember his crimes for all eternity. His body remained standing, eyes open but empty, a living statue wrapped in shadow. Breathing but gone. A fitting punishment, Salvian said coldly. For a man who stole voices, he gets eternal silence. The council hall fell into stunned quiet. Then, slowly, Lord Ashfeld rose from his seat. His ancient eyes met Callista's, and he dropped to one knee. "Forgive us, Lady Umbral. We should have questioned. We should have investigated. Your bloodline deserved better." Duchess Morgana followed, kneeling with tears streaming down her face. "The Shadowbound protected this kingdom for centuries. We failed you." One by one, every lord and lady in the chamber knelt, not in fear, but in recognition. The Vex twins. The warrior clans. Even Lucinda, Dorian's daughter, knelt with her head bowed in shame for her father's sins. Salvian remained standing beside Calista, his hand finding hers. Their fingers intertwined, blood and shadow, king and queen, destiny fulfilled. "The ancient law is hereby abolished," his voice rang with royal authority. "From this moment forward, leadership is determined not by rank at birth, but by the strength of one's spirit and the blessing of the mate bond. Calista of the Umbral line will stand beside me as Queen of Obsidian Vale. Does anyone object?" Silence. Then Lord Ashfeld spoke, "Long live the Shadowbound Queen." "Long live the Queen," the council echoed, their voices growing stronger, more certain. "Long live Queen Calista." 3 nights later, the entire kingdom gathered in the grand courtyard under a sky filled with stars. Thousands of vampires from every clan and bloodline crowded the space, their faces lit by floating lanterns that drifted like captured moonlight. Word had spread of the council session, of Dorian's crimes, of the king's miraculous healing. Now they waited to see the girl who had changed everything. Salvian stepped onto the royal balcony, and the crowd fell silent. He wore ceremonial white trimmed in silver, looking every inch the legendary king. But all eyes shifted when Calista emerged beside him. She wore a gown of midnight blue that seemed woven from shadows themselves, moving around her like living smoke. Her dark hair was crowned with a circlet of silver and onyx. She looked small beside Salvian's imposing presence, but the darkness that followed her, loyal, protective, powerful, made it clear she was no fragile thing. "People of Obsidian Vale," Salvian's voice carried across the courtyard. "I present to you my mate. My equal. Your queen. Calista Darkborn of the Umbral line." The crowd erupted, not in protest, but in thunderous applause. They had heard the stories. The servant girl chosen by destiny. The lost bloodline returned. The woman who healed an immortal king and brought a murderer to justice. Calista stepped forward, her heart pounding. She'd spent 19 years invisible, silent, convinced she was meant to disappear. Now thousands of eyes watched her, waiting. The old fear rose in her throat, the instinct to shrink, to hide, to become nothing. But she wasn't nothing anymore. "I was born in shadows," her voice was soft but somehow reached every corner of the courtyard, carried by magic that had waited too long to speak. "I lived in silence because I believed that was all I deserved. But destiny doesn't ask permission. It doesn't care about rank or bloodlines or who society says matters. It finds truth in the dark places. It chooses the overlooked. And it gave me a gift I never expected, the chance to stand beside a king who sees me not as a servant, but as his equal. Not as a weakness, but as his strength." The crowd hung on every word. Some wept openly. Others simply stared in wonder at the Omega who spoke with the authority of queens. Together, Calista continued, her confidence growing, "We will build a kingdom where no one is invisible. Where power is measured not by birth, but by character. Where shadows are not feared, but honored for the protection they offer." She raised her hand, and gentle shadows danced around the crowd, not threatening, but beautiful, weaving between the lanterns like silk ribbons. "This is my vow to you." The applause was deafening. Later, in the privacy of the royal chambers, away from crowds and ceremony, Salvian found Calista standing by the window, looking out over the kingdom that was now partly hers. He approached slowly and did something that shocked her. He knelt. "What are you?" "Let me say this," Salvian's voice was rough with emotion. His hands captured hers, and those electric blue eyes looked up at her with something that took her breath away. Not just love. Reverence. I have lived for centuries. I've commanded armies, ruled kingdoms, and stood alone at the apex of power. I thought I was complete. I thought my strength was enough. His grip tightened. But you showed me what I was missing. You weren't my weakness, Calista. You were never a shadow I needed to protect. You were the moon waiting for nightfall, the other half of my soul that I didn't know was missing until destiny put you in my path. Tears spilled down Callista's cheeks. I was invisible. You were waiting. Salvian stood and pulled her into his arms. Waiting to become exactly who you were meant to be. My queen. My mate. My equal in all things. She kissed him then, soft and desperate and filled with everything she couldn't put into words. The bond flared between them, complete and unbreakable, two halves of a whole finally united. Outside, Obsidian Vale settled into peaceful night. In the council hall, Dorian's frozen form stood as eternal warning. In the archives, scholars began carefully restoring umbral history that had been erased. In the streets, Omegas walked with their heads held higher, believing for the first time that destiny might notice them too. And in the royal chambers, a king and queen began their reign, a perfect balance of blood and shadow, strength and silence, light and darkness intertwined. Calista Darkborn, once overlooked, once invisible, once convinced she was meant to disappear, now ruled a kingdom that would never dare forget her name. If you believe everyone, regardless of rank or birth, deserves to be seen, heard, and valued, comment the overlooked rise and subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles. Only those who think some people don't matter won't. Which stories do you want to hear next? Let us know below. Thank you so much for staying with me through Calista and Salvian's entire journey. Honestly, it means the world to me that you watched until the very end. Most people scroll away, but you? You stayed. You believed in the quiet Omega who everyone overlooked, and that says so much about the kind of person you are. If Callista's story touched your heart even a little bit, I promise the next one will absolutely blow your mind. It's even more intense, more emotional, and filled with twists you won't see coming. I've poured my heart into it, and I can't wait for you to experience it. Click on the video showing on your screen right now. Trust me, you don't want to miss this one. Oh, and one more thing, I noticed some of you amazing souls haven't told me where you're watching from yet. I love knowing that this story reached someone in Tokyo, or Lagos, or maybe a small town I've never heard of. It makes this feel so much more real, you know? So please, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you are right now. Register your presence. Let me know I'm not just talking into the void, that there's a real person on the other side who connected with this story. I'll see you in the next one. Don't keep me waiting. Blue Heart.